The light was so very bright that Maggie Rose couldn't really see anything. For the second or third time, it had gone from pitch black to blinding, blinding white. Then someone's silhouette blocked out most of the light. Maggie still couldn't see who was there. Light radiated behind the person. Maggie clamped shut her eyes tightly, then opened them. She did this over and over again. She couldn't really see anything. Couldn't focus on whoever or whatever it was. She had to keep blinking. Whoever was up there had to see the blinking, had to know she was alive. "Mr. Seniji? Please help me," she tried to call out. Her throat was so dry. Her voice came out raspy and unrecognizable. "Shut up! Shut up!" a voice from above shouted. Someone was up there now. Someone was really up there and could get her out. It sounded like a very old woman's voice. "Please help me, please," Maggie begged. A hand came flying down and slapped her face hard. Maggie cried out. She was more frightened than hurt. But the blow hurt too. She'd never been slapped before. It set off a loud roar inside her head. "Stop your crying!" The eerie voice was closer. Then the person climbed down into the grave and was right over her. Maggie could smell strong body odor and someone's bad breath. She was being pinned down now, and she was too weak to fight back. "Don't fight me, you little bastard! Don't ever fight me! Who do you think you are, you little bastard? Don't you ever raise your hand to me, you hear me? Don't you ever!" Please, God, what was happening? "You're that famous Maggie Rose, aren't you? The rich, spoiled brat. Well, let me tell you a secret. Our secret. You're gonna die, little rich girl. You're gonna die." Chapter 17. The next day was Christmas Eve. It didn't feel like the season to be merry, and it was going to get a whole lot worse before Christmas Day. None of us had been able to make any of the usual festive holiday preparations with our families. It added to the tension the hostage rescue team was feeling. It magnified the misery of the depressing task. If Seniji had chosen the holiday season for this reason, he'd chosen well. He had turned everyone's Christmas to shit. Around 10 o'clock in the morning, I walked down Sorel Avenue to the Goldberg house. Sampson, meanwhile, had sneaked off to do a little work on the murders in Southeast. We planned to get back together around noon to compare horror stories. I talked with the Goldbergs for over an hour. They weren't holding up well. In a lot of ways, they were even more forthcoming than Catherine and Thomas Dunn. They were stricter parents than the Dunns, but Gerald and Laurie Goldberg loved their son dearly. 11 years earlier, Laurie Goldberg had been told by doctors that she couldn't have children. Her uterus had been scarred. When she found herself pregnant with Michael, it had seemed a miracle. Had Seniji known about that? I wondered. How carefully had he picked out his victims? Why Maggie Rose and Michael Goldberg? The Goldbergs allowed me to see Michael's bedroom and to spend some time there by myself. I shut the door to the room and sat quietly for several moments. I had done the same thing in Maggie's room at the Dunns. The boys' room was amazing. It was a treasure chest of state-of-the-art computer hardware and software. Macintosh, Nintendo, Prodigy, Windows. The AT&T labs had less equipment than Michael Goldberg. Posters of Catherine Rose from her films Taboo and Honeymoon were taped up on the walls. A poster of Skid Row's lead singer, Sebastian Bach, was centered over the bed. A picture of Albert Einstein with a mauve punk haircut stared out from Michael's private bathroom. Also, a Rolling Stone magazine cover that asked, "Who killed Pee Wee Herman?" A framed photograph of Michael and Maggie Rose was propped up on the boys' work desk. Posed arm in arm, the two kids looked like the greatest friends. What had inspired Seniji? Was it something about their special friendship? Neither of the Goldbergs had ever met Mr. Seniji, although Michael had talked a lot about him. Seniji was the only person, child or adult, who had ever beaten Michael at Nintendo games like Ultima and Super Mario Bros. It suggested that Seniji might be a brainiac himself, Another whiz kid, but not willing to let a 9-year-old beat him at video games for the sake of the cause, not willing to lose in any game. I was back in the library with the Goldbergs, looking out a window, when everything went completely and forever crazy on the kidnapping case. I saw Sampson running down the street from the Dunns. Each of his strides covered about a third of the block. I raced out the Goldbergs' front door at the same time that Sampson made it to the lawn. He broke stride like the San Francisco 49ers' Jerry Rice in the end zone. He called again? Sampson shook his head. No, there's been a break, though. Something happened, Alex. The FBI is keeping it under wraps, Sampson said. They've got something. Come on. A police roadblock had been set up just off Sorrel Avenue at the end of nearby Plately Bridge Lane. The roadblock of half a dozen wooden horses effectively stopped the press from following the cars that had left the Dunns just past 2 that afternoon. Sampson and I rode in the third car. 70 minutes later, the 3 sedans were speeding through the low hills surrounding Salisbury, Maryland. The cars circled down a winding road to an industrial park nestled in thick pine woods. The contemporary-looking complex was deserted on Christmas Eve. It was eerily quiet. Snow-blanketed lawns led the way to 3 separate white stone office buildings. Half a dozen local police cars and ambulances had already arrived at the mysterious scene. Some minor tributary that had to empty into Chesapeake Bay flowed behind the cluster of office buildings. The water was brownish red and looked polluted. Royal blue signs on the buildings read, J. Cad Manufacturing, the Racer Becton Group, Technosphere. Not a clue so far. Not a word had been uttered about what had happened in the industrial park. Sampson and I joined the group that headed down toward the river. 4 more FBI agents were at the site, and they looked worried. There was a patch of winter-thin, pale yellow weeds between the industrial park and the water. Then came a 30 or 40-yard barren strip to the river itself. The sky overhead was cardboard gray, threatening more snow. Down one muddy bank, sheriff's deputies were pouring casting compound, trying to get some footprints. Had Gary Sinigi been here? Have they told you anything? I asked Jessie Flanagan as we sidestepped down the steep, muddy embankment together. Her work shoes were getting ruined. She didn't seem to notice. No, not yet. Not a thing. She was as frustrated as Sampson and I were. This was the first opportunity for the team not to act like one. The Federal Bureau had their chance to cooperate. They blew it. Not a good sign. Not a promising beginning. Please, don't let this be those kids, Jessie Flanagan muttered as we reached flatter ground. 2 Bureau agents, Riley and Jerry Scorse, were at the riverside. Snow flurries drifted down. A bracing cold wind blew over the slate-gray water, which smelled like burning linoleum. My heart was in my throat the whole time. I couldn't see anything down along the shoreline. Agent Scorse made a short speech, which I think was meant to mollify the rest of us. Listen, this close-to-the-vest approach has nothing to do with any of you. Because of the wide press coverage this case has received, we were ordered, actually, not to say anything until we all got out here. Until we could see for ourselves. See what? Sampson asked the FBI special agent. You gonna tell us what the hell is going on? Let's cut down on the verbal diarrhea. Scorse signaled to one of the FBI agents and spoke to him briefly. His name was McGooey, and he was from the director's office in D.C. He'd been in and out of the Dunn house. We all thought that he was the replacement for Roger Graham, but that was never verified. McGooey nodded at whatever Scorse had told him, then stepped forward. He was a solemn-looking fat man with big teeth and a short white crew cut. He looked like an old military man who was close to retirement. The local police out here found a child floating in the river around 1 o'clock today, McGooey announced. They have no way of knowing if it's one of the 2 kidnapped children or not. Agent McGooey then walked all of us about 70 yards farther down the muddy riverbank. We stopped past a hump covered with moss and cattails. There wasn't a sound from anyone, just the bitter wind whistling over the water. We finally knew why we had been brought here. A small body had been covered over with gray wool blankets from one of the EMS wagons. It was the tiniest, loneliest bundle in the universe. One of the local policemen was asked to give us the necessary details. When he began to speak, his voice was thick and unsteady. "I'm Lieutenant Edward Mahoney. I'm with the force here in Salisbury. About an hour and 20 minutes ago, a security guard with Razor Becton discovered the body of a child down here. We walked closer to the spread of blankets. The body was laid on a mound of grass that sloped into the brackish water. Beyond the grass, and to the left, was a black-looking tamarack swamp." Lieutenant Mahoney knelt down beside the tiny body. His gray uniformed knee sank into the wet mud. Flecks of snow floated around his face, sticking to his hair and cheeks. Almost reverently, he pulled back the wool blankets. It seemed as if he were a father, gently waking a child for some early morning fishing trip. Just a few hours ago, I had been looking at a photo of the 2 kidnapped children. I was the first to speak over the murdered child's body. "It's Michael Goldberg," I said in a soft but clear voice. "I'm sorry to say that it's Michael. It's poor little Shrimpy." Chapter 18. Jessie Flanagan didn't get home until early Christmas morning. Her head was spinning, bursting with too many ideas about the kidnapping. She had to stop the obsessive images for a while. She had to shut down her engines, or the plant would explode. She had to stop being a cop. The difference between her and some other cops, she knew, was that she could stop. Jessie was living in Arlington with her mother. They shared a small, cramped condo apartment near the Crystal City Underground. Jessie thought of it as the suicide flat. The living arrangement was supposed to be temporary, except that she had been there close to a year now, ever since her divorce from Dennis Kelleher. Dennis the Menace was up in northern Jersey these days, still trying to make it to the New York Times. He was never going to accomplish that feat, Jessie knew in her heart. The only thing Dennis had ever been good at was trying to make Jessie doubt herself. Dennis had been a real standout in that department. But in the end, she wouldn't let him beat her down. She had been working too hard at the service to find time to move out of her mother's condo. At least, that was what she kept telling herself. There'd been no time to have a life. She was saving up for something big, some kind of significant life change. She'd been calculating her net worth at least a couple of times a week, every week. She had all of $24,000. That was everything. She was 32 now. She knew she was good-looking, almost beautiful, the way Dennis Kelleher was almost a good writer. Jessie could have been a contender, she often thought to herself. She almost had it made. All she needed was one decent break, and she'd finally realized she had to make that break for herself. She was committed to it. She drank a Smithwich, a really fine ale from the old sod. Smitty's had been her father's favorite brand of poison in the world. She nibbled a slice of fresh cheddar. Then she had a second ale in the shower, down dreary hallway number 1 at her mother's. Michael Goldberg's little face flashed at her again. She wouldn't allow any more flash images of the Goldberg boy to come. She wouldn't feel any guilt, even if she was bursting at the seams with it. The 2 children had been abducted during her watch. That was how everything had started. Stop the images. Stop everything for now. Irene Flanagan was coughing in her sleep. Her mother had worked 39 years for C&P Telephone. She owned the condo in Crystal City. She was a killer bridge player. That was it for Irene. Jessie's father had been a cop in D.C. for 27 years. The end game came for Terry Flanagan on his beloved job. A heart attack in crowded Union Station, with hundreds of complete strangers watching him die, nobody really caring. Anyway, that was the way Jessie always told the story. Jessie decided again, for the 1,000th time, that she had to move out of her mother's place, no matter what. No more lame excuses. Move it or lose it, girl. Move on. Move on. Move on with your life. She had completely lost track of how long she'd been drowning in the shower, holding the empty beer bottle at her side, rubbing the cool glass against